The evening air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and grilled salmon when Marcus Wellington III walked into the Golden Terrace restaurant. His designer shoes clicked against the marble floor with an authority that demanded attention. Every head turned, not out of admiration but out of cautious awareness. Marcus was known in the city as a man who measured his worth in dollar signs and measured others by how far beneath him they stood. Sarah Thompson had been working the evening shift for 3 hours already. Her feet ached in shoes that were one size too small, bought secondhand from a thrift store downtown. She balanced 4 plates on her arms with practiced ease, delivering orders to table 7 with a smile that never quite reached her tired eyes. The smile was part of the uniform, just like the black slacks and white shirt that she washed every night in her tiny apartment sink. When Marcus snapped his fingers in her direction, Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had served him twice before, and both times had ended with complaints sent to management. The first time his water had too much ice. The second time not enough. She approached his table with caution, notepad ready, professional smile fixed in place. Marcus barely glanced at her. His attention was fixed on his phone, scrolling through stock prices with one hand while the other drummed impatiently on the white tablecloth. 3 other men sat with him, all wearing suits that cost more than Sarah made in 6 months. They were laughing at something, their voices loud enough to disturb the nearby tables. Sarah waited. She knew better than to interrupt. The minutes stretched out awkwardly as other customers glanced over, some with sympathy, others with curiosity. Finally, Marcus looked up, his cold blue eyes scanning her as if she were a piece of furniture that had suddenly appeared in his line of sight. He ordered without please or thank you. Steak, rare, with specific instructions about temperature, seasoning, and presentation. His companions ordered similarly complicated meals, each one adding modifications and special requests. Sarah wrote everything down carefully, her hand steady despite the growing knot in her chest. She repeated the orders back perfectly, a skill she had developed over 2 years of serving people who treated her as invisible. As she turned to leave, Marcus spoke again. His voice carried across the restaurant, intentionally loud. He told his friends about the piano sitting unused in the corner of the dining room. It was a beautiful instrument, a grand piano that the restaurant owner had purchased at an auction, more for decoration than function. No one had played it in months. Marcus wondered aloud with false curiosity if any of the staff could play. He said it would be entertaining to hear some music with dinner, but his tone made it clear he expected nothing but failure. His friends chuckled, understanding the game. They had seen Marcus humiliate people before. It was his favorite sport, more satisfying to him than golf or yachting. Sarah felt the question aimed at her even though Marcus had not looked her way. Other servers had paused in their work, sensing the trap being set. The restaurant manager, Mr. Chen, approached nervously. He was a kind man who had given Sarah a chance when other places turned her away because of her lack of experience. He explained politely that the piano was not used during service, that they had no pianist on staff. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression amused. He suggested that surely someone could play something simple. Perhaps one of the waitresses had taken lessons as a child. He looked directly at Sarah now, and she understood. This was not a request. This was a challenge, a setup designed to embarrass her in front of the entire restaurant. The dining room had gone quiet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Everyone watched Sarah, waiting to see what she would do. Some customers looked uncomfortable, recognizing cruelty when they saw it. Others seemed entertained, ready for the show. Sarah's mind raced. She thought about her rent due in 5 days. She thought about her mother's medical bills, stacked on her kitchen counter. She thought about the electricity that had been shut off last month until she could scrape together enough for the deposit. She needed this job. She could not afford to refuse Marcus Wellington III. Mr. Chen started to intervene to protect his employee, but Sarah touched his arm gently. She handed him her notepad and order pad. Her hands did not shake. She looked at Marcus directly, meeting his gaze with something he did not expect to see. Not fear, not anger, just a quiet, steady resolve. She walked toward the piano. Each step felt impossibly long. The restaurant was so silent she could hear her own breathing. She reached the instrument and stood beside it for a moment, looking at the keys she had not touched in public for 3 years, not since her father's funeral, when she had played his favorite song while family and friends wept in wooden pews. Marcus called out another comment, something about hoping she knew more than chopsticks. His friends laughed on cue, but Sarah was no longer listening to him. She was remembering her father's hands guiding hers over the keys when she was 5 years old. She was remembering the scholarship to the music conservatory that she had turned down when he got sick. She was remembering the choice she made to work instead of study, to pay bills instead of pursuing dreams. Sarah sat down on the piano bench. She adjusted her position slightly, her posture transforming. The exhausted waitress disappeared, replaced by someone else entirely. Someone Marcus Wellington III did not know existed. Someone who had spent 15 years learning to speak a language more beautiful than words. She placed her fingers on the keys. The restaurant held its breath. And then Sarah began to play. The first notes floated through the restaurant like something alive. Sarah had chosen Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece she had performed at her conservatory audition years ago. The melody was soft at first, almost hesitant, like a question being asked in the darkness. Her fingers moved across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for hands that had spent the evening carrying heavy plates and wiping down tables. Marcus had expected fumbling. He had expected a painful rendition of a simple tune, something a child might play at a school recital. He had expected embarrassment and stuttering apologies. What he had not expected was this. The music that filled the room was not merely competent, it was extraordinary. Sarah's eyes were closed now. She was no longer in the Golden Terrace restaurant. She was in her childhood living room, with afternoon sunlight streaming through windows and her father sitting beside her, humming along. She was in the practice rooms at the conservatory during her audition, playing for judges who had leaned forward in their seats. She was at her father's bedside in the hospital, playing on the old keyboard she had brought in, watching him smile through his pain. The technical precision was flawless. Every trill, every dynamic shift, every subtle pedal change was executed with the skill of someone who had dedicated years to the craft. But technique alone did not explain the effect the music had on the room. There was something else in Sarah's playing, something that came from a place deeper than training. There was emotion, raw and honest, that transformed notes on a page into a story everyone could understand without words. A woman at table 12 had tears running down her cheeks. She did not bother to wipe them away. An elderly couple near the window had stopped eating entirely, their hands finding each other across the table. The restaurant staff stood frozen, in place, some holding water pitchers, others gripping menus, all of them transported. Marcus's smile had vanished. He sat very still, his phone forgotten on the table. His friends had stopped laughing. One of them, a man named Richard who had known Marcus since college, watched his friend's face change. He saw confusion there, and something that might have been shame, though Richard could not be certain. Marcus Wellington III rarely showed anything resembling self-doubt. The music swelled, growing more complex. Sarah's hands moved faster now, dancing across the keys in patterns that seemed impossible to follow. The melody shifted between major and minor keys, between light and shadow, between hope and sorrow. It told a story of beauty existing alongside hardship, of dignity maintained in the face of cruelty, of dreams that refused to die even when circumstances tried to bury them. Mr. Chen stood near the kitchen entrance, his hand covering his mouth. He had hired Sarah because she seemed desperate and willing to work any shift. He had known she was overqualified for the job, sensed she was running from something or toward something. But he had never imagined this. He thought about the nights. She had volunteered for double shifts, the way she never complained about difficult customers, the quiet competence she brought to even the smallest tasks. Other servers began to understand. Rebecca, who had trained Sarah on her first day, remembered how Sarah had talked about music school during their break, then had changed the subject quickly, as if the memory hurt too much to examine. James, the bartender, recalled seeing Sarah stop sometimes when the restaurant's sound system played classical music, her eyes distant, her expression unreadable. The piece built toward its climax. Sarah's entire body moved with the music now, swaying slightly, her face showing the intensity of what she was creating. The notes tumbled over each other, cascading like water, like light, like something that could not be contained. The restaurant had become a concert hall. Every person in the room was an audience member. united in this unexpected moment of shared beauty. Marcus found himself leaning forward despite himself. He was a man who attended charity galas and opera performances, who owned season tickets to the Philharmonic that he rarely used, who donated to the arts for tax deductions and social status. He had heard professional musicians countless times, sitting in expensive seats checking his watch, making business deals during intermissions. He could not remember the last time music had actually moved him, had reached past his defenses and touched something he kept carefully buried. The realization crept over him slowly, uncomfortably. This waitress, this woman he had intended to humiliate for his own amusement, was not just competent, she was exceptional. She was perhaps more talented than many of the musicians he had heard in concert halls that charged hundreds of dollars for admission. And she was here, serving him dinner, wearing shoes that did not fit properly, enduring his cruelty with quiet dignity. The Chopin piece began its descent toward the ending. The notes grew softer, more reflective, like someone saying goodbye to something precious. Sarah's fingers slowed their movement, drawing out each phrase with careful attention. The melody became a whisper, then a breath, then silence. Her hands lifted from the keys and rested in her lap. She sat very still for a moment, her eyes still, closed, returning slowly from wherever the music had taken her. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. The moment stretched out, fragile and perfect, hanging in the air like the last echo of a bell. Then, from the back of the restaurant, someone began to applaud. Others joined immediately. Within seconds, the entire dining room was on its feet, clapping with genuine enthusiasm, some people calling out praise, others simply smiling with wonder. Sarah opened her eyes. She looked startled, as if she had forgotten where she was, forgotten the circumstances that had led her to the piano. The applause washed over her and she stood slowly, her legs unsteady. She was a waitress again, wearing her uniform, suddenly very aware of every person watching her. The transformation back was painful to witness. Marcus Wellington III remained seated. He was not applauding. His hands rested on the table, motionless. His expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask that revealed nothing. But inside, something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the armor of his certainty, in his comfortable belief that money and status were the only measures of worth. The crack was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. Sarah walked back from the piano on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The applause continued, but she barely heard it. She was focused on maintaining her composure, on not letting the emotion overwhelm her. Playing again had ripped open something inside her that she had worked hard to seal closed. The memories of her father, of the life she had planned, of the girl she used to be, all came flooding back with painful clarity. Mr. Chen met her halfway across the dining room. His eyes were wet and he gripped her shoulders gently. He told her to take a moment, to go to the back room and collect herself. But Sarah shook her head. She needed to work. She needed the distraction. She needed the routine of taking orders and delivering food. The simple tasks that kept her mind from wandering to places too painful to visit. She picked up her notepad from where Mr. Chen had set it on the service station. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with her. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the kitchen to place Marcus's table order. The other servers watched her pass, their expressions a mixture of awe and concern. Rebecca squeezed her arm as she went by, a gesture of support that needed no words. The kitchen was hot and chaotic as always. The head chef, a temperamental man named Vincent, was shouting instructions in rapid French while his staff moved with practiced efficiency. Sarah handed over the order slip, her voice steady as she repeated the specific requirements Marcus had demanded. Vincent glanced at her, started to make a joke about the performance, then saw her face and simply nodded, turning back to his work. Back in the dining room, the atmosphere had changed. Conversations had resumed, but they were different now, hushed and thoughtful. Several customers had asked their servers who Sarah was, whether she was a professional musician. One elderly gentleman had tried to give a server $50 to pass along to her, insisting she deserved payment for such a gift. The server had politely declined, explaining it was not necessary, but the gesture spoke to something the music had awakened in people. Marcus sat in silence while his friends struggled to restart their previous conversation. They talked about business deals and stock portfolios, but the words felt hollow now, performative. Richard kept glancing at Marcus, trying to gauge his mood. He had seen his friend embarrassed before, had watched him lose business negotiations and suffer small social defeats, but this was different. This cut deeper because Marcus had orchestrated it himself, had walked willingly into a trap of his own making. When Sarah returned with their appetizers, the table fell silent. She set down each plate with her usual care, describing the dishes briefly, refilling water glasses without being asked. Her movements were professional, efficient, exactly as they had been before the piano. But something had changed in the way the men at the table looked at her. They saw her now as a person, not a servant. The shift was uncomfortable for all of them. Marcus watched her work. He noticed details he had never observed before. The careful way she balanced multiple plates without ever appearing rushed. The genuine warmth in her voice when she asked if everything was satisfactory. The quick, subtle way she cleared space on the table to make room for the dishes, anticipating needs before they were expressed. These were skills too, he realized. Different from piano playing, but requiring their own form of excellence. She was about to leave when Marcus spoke. His voice was quieter than before, lacking the performative volume he had used earlier. He asked her name. Sarah paused, surprised by the question. She told him, her tone neutral, professional. He repeated it, as if testing how it sounded, as if hearing it for the first time despite the name tag pinned to her shirt. Marcus asked where she had learned to play. The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. His friends shifted in their seats, uncomfortable witnesses to a conversation that felt too personal for a public restaurant. Sarah met his eyes directly. She said she had studied since childhood, had been accepted to a conservatory on scholarship. She did not elaborate. She did not explain why she was here instead of there. The gaps in the story were deliberate, boundaries she was not willing to cross. He asked if she played professionally. The word professionally felt like a knife. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She said she did not. That this was her profession now, gesturing slightly to indicate the restaurant. The response was not defensive, just factual, a statement of reality delivered without self-pity. She excused herself and returned to the kitchen, leaving Marcus with more questions than answers. The rest of the evening passed in a strange fog. Sarah moved through her duties mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Several other customers complimented her playing, asked for her name so they could tell friends. One woman, a music teacher, asked if Sarah gave lessons. The attention was overwhelming. Sarah had spent 3 years trying to be invisible, trying to disappear into the background of other people's lives. Now she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that made her want to run. Marcus ate his meal without tasting it. His friends made several attempts at conversation, eventually giving up and eating in relative silence. The evening he had planned, the entertainment at someone else's expense, had backfired spectacularly. He felt something he rarely experienced, genuine uncertainty. The comfortable narrative he carried about the world, about his place in it, about the value of different types of people, had been challenged. He did not like the feeling. When Sarah brought the check, Marcus did something he had never done before in this restaurant. He looked at her, really looked at her, and said thank you. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Sarah nodded, accepting the payment, and walked away to process the transaction. She did not see Marcus pull out his phone, typing something quickly, his expression thoughtful. As Sarah processed the credit card, Mr. Chen approached her again. He told her she could leave early if she wanted, that he would handle her remaining tables. Other servers had volunteered to cover for her. Sarah considered the offer, then declined. She needed the full shift. She needed every hour she was scheduled. The money was not negotiable, not with her mother's latest medical bill sitting unopened in her apartment. She returned with the receipt. Marcus had left a tip that made her pause. It was substantial, more than generous, but attached to it was a business card with a handwritten note on the back. The note said simply that he knew people in the classical music world, that he would like to help if she was interested, that she should call him. Sarah stared at the card for a long moment. Then she slipped it into her apron pocket and walked away without acknowledgement. She had learned long ago to be wary of offers that seemed too good to be true, especially from men like Marcus Wellington III. The business card sat on Sarah's kitchen counter for 3 days. She walked past it countless times, always aware of its presence, never quite ready to pick it up. Her apartment was small, just one room with a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. The furniture was mismatched, collected from thrift stores and sidewalk discards. But it was clean and organized, everything in its proper place because Sarah needed order in the few things she could control. She had not told anyone about what happened at the restaurant. Her mother called the day after, her voice weak over the phone, asking about work and bills and whether Sarah was eating properly. Sarah spoke in the bright, cheerful tone she always used with her mother, the voice that said everything was fine, that there was nothing to worry about. She did not mention Marcus or the piano or the card that promised possibilities she was afraid to consider. On the fourth day, Sarah picked up the card. She turned it over in her hands, studying the embossed lettering on the front. Marcus Wellington III, with a title listing him as CEO of Wellington Capital Management. The address was in the most expensive part of the city, the kind of building she had only seen from the outside. On the back, his handwriting was surprisingly neat, the note brief and businesslike despite its personal nature. She thought about her father. He would have told her to call, to take the chance, to never let pride stand in the way of opportunity. He had believed in her talent with an unwavering certainty that sometimes felt like a burden. Even at the end, when the hospital machines beeped their steady rhythm and morphine clouded his thoughts, he had made her promise not to give up on music. She had promised, meaning it at the time, believing she would find a way back. 3 years later, she was still waiting. The money from that night's tip had gone immediately to bills. The electric company first, then a payment toward her mother's medical debt, then groceries and rent. It was gone in 48 hours, absorbed into the endless cycle of financial survival. But the card remained, a small rectangle of possibility that refused to be so easily dismissed. Sarah dialed the number at 7 in the morning, calculating that she would reach a secretary or voicemail, that she could leave a message and avoid direct conversation. But Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the early hour. He sounded pleased to hear from her, not surprised. He said he had been hoping she would call. The conversation was brief. Marcus suggested they meet for coffee to discuss opportunities. He mentioned knowing the director of the city's symphony orchestra, connections with various music venues, people who were always looking for talented performers. His tone was professional, almost formal, completely different from the man who had mocked her at the restaurant. Sarah agreed to meet, her voice careful, non-committal. She gave nothing away. They met at a coffee shop in a neutral part of town, neither expensive nor cheap, the kind of place where business meetings and first dates happened in equal measure. Marcus arrived first, already seated at a corner table with 2 coffees waiting. He stood when Sarah approached, an old-fashioned gesture that seemed out of place on a man who had been so casually cruel just days before. He apologized immediately. The words came out stiffly as if he was unused to saying them, but they seemed genuine. He said his behavior at the restaurant was inexcusable, that he had spent the days since thinking about it, about her, about the assumptions he made too easily. Sarah listened without responding, her face neutral, waiting to see where this would lead. Marcus talked about his life unprompted. He spoke about growing up wealthy, about always having doors opened before he reached them, about never learning to see people as anything other than useful or not useful. His father had taught him that the world was divided into winners and losers, that kindness was weakness, that respect had to be earned through power and money. It was an explanation, not an excuse, and Marcus made that distinction clear. Sarah sipped her coffee, still wary. She had met men like Marcus before, men who learned empathy as a tool, who discovered kindness when it served their interests. But something in his manner suggested this might be different. He seemed genuinely uncomfortable, struggling with concepts that did not come naturally to him. It was like watching someone learn a new language, stumbling over unfamiliar words. He asked about her story. Sarah hesitated, then decided partial truth was safer than complete silence. She told him about her father, about the scholarship, about choosing medical bills over music school. She did not mention how her father's insurance had lapsed because of a paperwork error, or how the hospital had continued treatment, but sent the bills anyway, or how she had signed payment plans that would take 20 years to complete. Some details were too personal, too painful to share with a man she barely knew. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something unexpected. He said he could not fix the past. could not undo the choices she had made or the circumstances that had forced them. But he could perhaps open a door to the future. He had already made calls, pulled strings, arranged an audition with the symphony orchestra. They needed a pianist for their educational outreach program, performing at schools and community centers. The pay was modest but steady. The schedule would allow her to keep working at the restaurant if needed. Sarah felt her heart hammering in her chest. An audition, with a real orchestra. The possibility was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She asked why he was doing this. Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. He said that watching her play had reminded him that value existed beyond balance sheets, that talent and dignity could not be measured in dollars, that he had been wrong about many things for a very long time. It was not a complete answer, but it was honest. She asked what he wanted in return. The question was blunt, necessary. Men like Marcus always wanted something. He smiled, a sad expression that did not quite reach his eyes. He said he wanted nothing except perhaps to prove to himself that he was capable of doing something decent, without calculating the return on investment. Sarah studied his face, looking for deception, finding only awkward sincerity. She agreed to the audition. They exchanged phone numbers, discussed logistics, arranged for Marcus to send her the details. As they stood to leave, Marcus extended his hand. Sarah shook it, his grip firm but not aggressive. He thanked her for coming, for giving him a chance to make something right. Sarah nodded, still processing, still not entirely sure what had just happened. Walking home, Sarah pulled out her phone and stared at the audition details Marcus had already texted. The date was 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to prepare, to practice pieces she had not performed in years, to remember what it felt like to play for something other than survival or spite. She thought about calling her mother, sharing the news, but something held her back. Hope was dangerous. It had disappointed her before. Better to wait, to see if this door would actually open or if it would slam shut at the last moment, leaving her exactly where she started. Finding time to practice proved harder than Sarah anticipated. The restaurant was short-staffed, and Mr. Chen had been asking her to pick up extra shifts. She could not refuse, not with rent approaching and her mother's pharmacy calling about unpaid prescriptions. So she practiced in fragments, stolen moments carved from a life already stretched too thin. She woke at 5 in the morning and walked 40 minutes to a church on the east side of town. The pastor there, Father Michael, had known her father years ago. When Sarah had quietly asked if she might use the old piano in the fellowship hall before morning services, he had given her a key without hesitation. The instrument was out of tune and several keys stuck, but it was a piano, and it was available, and that was enough. Her fingers were clumsy at first, stiff from years of neglect and nights spent carrying heavy trays. The music that had flowed so effortlessly at the restaurant now came in halting phrases, interrupted by missed notes and timing errors. Sarah fought frustration, reminding herself that muscle memory took time to rebuild, that excellence was not a switch she could simply flip back on. The pieces she had chosen for the audition were ambitious. A Bach prelude and fugue, technical and precise, designed to demonstrate control. A Rachmaninoff prelude, passionate and powerful, showcasing emotional depth. And a contemporary piece, by a living composer, proving she could interpret modern work. Together, they represented 15 minutes of music that would determine whether the door Marcus had opened would lead anywhere meaningful. At the restaurant, life continued with strange new undercurrents. Word had spread about Sarah's performance, and some regular customers now requested her section specifically. They treated her differently, more respectfully, as if her talent had somehow made her real to them in a way mere service had not. Sarah found this both gratifying and troubling. She was the same person she had been before sitting at that piano. Only their perception had changed. Marcus came to the restaurant twice more before the audition. He did not sit at Sarah's tables, did not create situations that might be awkward. But she saw him watching from across the room, his expression thoughtful. Once, when she passed near his table on the way to the kitchen, he nodded in greeting. She nodded back, a small acknowledgement of their strange new connection. Rebecca, the server who had trained Sarah, finally cornered her during a slow afternoon shift. She demanded details, having pieced together enough from gossip and observation to know something significant was happening. Sarah told her about the audition, about Marcus's unexpected assistance, about the possibility of a different future. Rebecca hugged her fiercely, then immediately began offering advice about what to wear, how to present herself, tricks for managing performance anxiety. The advice was kind, but unnecessary. Sarah had performed in high-pressure situations before, had competed in youth competitions where judges sat with clipboards and parents watched with desperate intensity. She knew how to channel nerves into focus, how to make a stage or an audition room feel like a private space where only the music mattered. The skill had not left her. It had simply been waiting, dormant, for a reason to resurface. 3 days before the audition, Sarah's mother called with bad news. The latest treatment was not working as hoped. The doctors wanted to try a different approach, more aggressive, more expensive. Her mother spoke apologetically, as if her illness was an inconvenience she should have better controlled. Sarah listened, doing calculations in her head, trying to figure out how to cover costs that had no right answer. That night, Sarah almost called Marcus. His business card was still in her wallet, worn at the edges from handling. She imagined asking for money, for a loan, for help that went beyond professional connections. But she could not make herself dial the number. Whatever was developing between them, whatever tentative respect or understanding, felt too fragile to burden with financial desperation. She had accepted his help with the audition. Asking for more felt like crossing a line she was not ready to cross. Instead, she picked up additional shifts. She worked doubles and triples, sleeping 4 hours a night, practicing piano at dawn before her body was fully awake. The exhaustion accumulated like a weight on her shoulders, making her movements slower, her smile more difficult to maintain. But she pushed through, driven by necessity and the approaching audition date that promised either transformation or bitter disappointment. 2 days before the audition, Sarah's hands began to cramp. The combination of piano practice and carrying heavy trays had pushed them past their limit. She soaked them in warm water with Epsom salt, massaged them carefully, took over-the-counter pain medication. But the cramping persisted, sharp little reminders that bodies have boundaries even when circumstances demand they do not. She called Marcus in a moment of panic. Her voice was tight with stress when he answered. She explained about her hands, about the fear that she would not be able to perform at the level required. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then asked for her address. She gave it reluctantly, immediately regretting the impulse that had made her call. He arrived an hour later with a physical therapist who specialized in treating musicians. The woman, Dr. Lin, was professional and efficient. She examined Sarah's hands with gentle expertise, asked questions about her practice schedule and work routine. Then she spent 40 minutes working on Sarah's hands and forearms, using techniques that were sometimes painful, but immediately effective. The cramping eased. Mobility returned. Marcus waited in the small kitchen area, looking out of place in the modest apartment. When Dr. Lin finished and packed her equipment, he paid her cash and thanked her for coming on short notice. After she left, he turned to Sarah with an expression that was hard to read. He told her she needed to rest her hands for the next day, to practice only lightly, to trust that the preparation she had done was enough. Then he left, declining her stammered thanks, leaving her alone with the smell of therapeutic oil and the lingering presence of unexpected kindness. The night before the audition, Sarah could not sleep. She lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, thinking about the path that had led her here, the decisions made in hospital rooms, the opportunities abandoned, the years spent surviving instead of living. She thought about her father, about the promises made at deathbeds, about the weight of talent that could not find its proper place in the world. At 3 a.m, she got up and sat at her small kitchen table. She pulled out Marcus's business card again, studying it in the dim light. She thought about the man who had given it to her, about the journey from cruelty to conscience that he seemed to be making. She wondered if people could really change, if patterns established over lifetimes could be broken by single moments of clarity. She did not have answers, only questions, and a hope so fragile she was afraid to examine it too closely. When dawn came, Sarah dressed carefully in the only professional outfit she owned, a simple black dress bought for her father's funeral. She looked at herself in the small bathroom mirror, seeing a woman who was neither the girl who had auditioned for conservatory, nor the waitress serving wealthy diners. Someone in between, someone still becoming, someone whose story had not yet reached its final chapter. She took a deep breath, picked up her sheet music and walked out the door toward whatever came next. The Symphony Hall was a building Sarah had passed hundreds of times but never entered. Its marble facade and grand columns spoke of old money and established culture, of a world she had once expected to inhabit. Now walking up the wide steps with her sheet music tucked under her arm, she felt like an imposter, someone who had accidentally wandered into a space not meant for her. Inside, the lobby was vast and echoing. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, walls decorated with portraits of former conductors and benefactors. A security guard directed her to the side entrance where auditions were being held. Sarah followed the signs down a corridor that grew progressively less grand, the glamour giving way to the practical spaces where work actually happened. The waiting area was a small room with folding chairs and fluorescent lighting. 3 other pianists were already there, all younger than Sarah, all dressed in expensive clothes that signaled proper training and family support. They looked up when she entered, assessed her in a quick glance, then returned to their music or their phones. Sarah sat in the corner, hands folded in her lap, trying to calm breathing that wanted to accelerate into panic. She listened as other musicians auditioned in the room beyond. A violinist played something bright and technical. A cellist performed a piece Sarah recognized from her conservatory days. Each musician emerged after 15 or 20 minutes, expressions ranging from confident to dejected. The door would open, a name would be called, someone would disappear inside. The waiting continued. Marcus had sent a text that morning wishing her luck. Sarah had not responded, too nervous to find appropriate words. She thought about him now, about the chain of events that had led here, the cruelty that had accidentally revealed her talent, the guilt that had transformed into action, the strange partnership that had formed between 2 people who should have remained strangers passing in separate worlds. Her name was called. Sarah stood, her legs uncertain beneath her. She walked through the door into a small auditorium. The stage was bare except for a grand piano, beautiful and well-maintained, the kind of instrument she had dreamed of playing during her conservatory years. In the audience section, 3 people sat with clipboards and serious expressions. The director, a woman named Catherine Morrison, smiled encouragingly. The other 2, music professors from the local university, remained neutral. Sarah walked to the piano. The stage lights were hot and bright, making the audience difficult to see clearly. She sat on the bench and adjusted her position, movements automatic from years of training. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the smooth ivory beneath her fingers. For a moment, she let herself simply exist in this space, this moment, this opportunity that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Catherine Morrison asked her to begin whenever she was ready. Sarah started with the Bach, letting the mathematical precision of the prelude ground her. Her hands moved with confidence now, the cramping gone, the muscle memory fully restored. The fugue was complex, multiple voices weaving together, requiring perfect clarity and control. She executed it flawlessly, each note crystalline and exact. When she finished the Bach, one of the professors nodded slightly, making a note on his clipboard. Sarah did not allow herself to interpret the gesture. She moved immediately into the Rachmaninoff, a complete shift in style and emotion. This piece was all passion and power, demanding not just technical skill but the ability to convey deep feeling. Sarah poured into it everything she had not allowed herself to express in 3 years of survival mode. The grief for her father, the frustration of dreams deferred, the anger at circumstances that had forced impossible choices, the hope, fragile and persistent, that this moment might matter. The music filled the auditorium, bouncing off walls designed for perfect acoustics. Sarah's entire body engaged with the playing, swaying, leaning into the powerful chords, pulling back for the gentle passages. She was not performing for the judges. She was playing for herself, for her father, for the girl she used to be and the woman she was trying to become. The Rachmaninoff ended with a series of crashing chords that resonated in the silence that followed. Sarah kept her hands on the keys for a moment, allowing the sound to fade completely. Then she moved into the contemporary piece, the most challenging of the 3. The composer used unusual time signatures and unexpected harmonic progressions, requiring intense concentration and interpretive skill. Sarah had spent hours analyzing the piece, understanding its structure, finding the logic beneath its apparent chaos. When the final notes faded, Sarah lifted her hands and placed them in her lap. She was sweating, her heart racing, her body exhausted from the intensity of the performance. She looked up at the judges, trying to read their expressions, finding nothing conclusive. Catherine Morrison thanked her and said they would be in touch within a week. The audition was over. Sarah walked off the stage on legs that trembled slightly. In the corridor outside, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. She had done her best. Whether her best was good enough remained to be seen. The other pianists in the waiting room watched her emerge, trying to gauge how it had gone from her expression. Sarah gave them nothing, her face carefully neutral. She left the building quickly, not wanting to linger in a space that represented so much potential disappointment. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. Sarah walked without direction, needing movement, needing to process what had just happened. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus asking how it went. She typed a brief response saying it was done, that she would know soon. His reply came immediately, saying he was proud of her for taking the chance. Sarah sat on a bench in a nearby park and allowed herself to feel the weight of exhaustion that had been building for weeks. The early mornings, the double shifts, the emotional toll of hoping for something better while preparing for disappointment. She thought about what would happen if the audition failed. She would continue at the restaurant, continue paying down impossible debt, continue surviving without living. The thought was not tragic, just tired. She was so tired. But there was also another possibility, one she was afraid to examine too closely. If the audition succeeded, if she was offered the position, her life would change in ways both exciting and terrifying. She would have to trust that doors could actually open, that opportunities could be real, that people like Marcus could facilitate transformation without demanding unsustainable prices. Trust had never been Sarah's strength. Her phone rang. Sarah looked at the screen, not recognizing the number. She answered cautiously. Catherine Morrison's voice came through, warm and direct. She said they did not usually make decisions this quickly, but the committee had been unanimous. They wanted to offer Sarah the position. The pay would start immediately. The schedule was flexible, and there would be opportunities to perform with the full orchestra in addition to the educational outreach work. Catherine said Sarah's playing was exceptional, that they were thrilled to have found someone with her level of skill and emotional depth. Sarah sat very still, the phone pressed to her ear, trying to process words that seemed to be coming from a very long distance. She had prepared for rejection, had armored herself against hope. Success was harder to manage, requiring a different kind of strength. She accepted the position, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Catherine provided details about contracts and start dates, practical information that Sarah wrote down with shaking hands. When the call ended, Sarah continued sitting on the bench, staring at nothing. People walked past, dogs pulled on leashes, children played on swings nearby. The world continued its ordinary motion while Sarah's personal world shifted on its axis. She thought about calling her mother, sharing the news, but found herself dialing a different number instead. Marcus answered immediately. Sarah told him about the offer, her voice catching slightly on the words. There was a pause. Then Marcus spoke with genuine pleasure, congratulating her, saying he had known she would succeed. Sarah thanked him, then said something she had not planned to say. She told him that what he had done, creating this opportunity, mattered more than he probably realized. That sometimes redemption was possible, even for people who started from positions of cruelty. That change was hard but not impossible. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion he was not quite managing to hide. He said he was the one who should be grateful, that watching her play had woken something in him that had been sleeping for too long, that she had given him more than she knew. They spoke for a few more minutes, making plans to celebrate properly, acknowledging the strange friendship that had formed from such unlikely beginnings. When Sarah hung up, she was smiling. 6 months later, Sarah stood backstage at the main symphony hall preparing for her first full orchestra performance. She was no longer wearing a waitress uniform, but a long black concert dress, her hair styled professionally, her hands free of the calluses that had come from years of carrying trays. The transformation was external, but something deeper had changed too. She stood differently, spoke differently, carried herself with a quiet confidence that had been buried under survival for too long. The position with the educational outreach program had exceeded her expectations. She performed at schools throughout the city, watching children's faces light up as music filled gymnasiums and cafeterias. She taught workshops explaining piano basics to kids who had never touched an instrument. The work was fulfilling in ways she had not anticipated, connecting her talent to purpose, making her father's belief in the transformative power of music feel validated. The orchestra had quickly recognized that Sarah's abilities extended beyond the outreach program. Catherine Morrison had advocated for her inclusion in main stage performances, and tonight was the culmination of that advocacy. Sarah would be performing a piano concerto with the full orchestra, a Grieg piece that was technically demanding and emotionally rich. The concert had sold out weeks ago. In the audience, Sarah's mother sat in the front row. She had been strong enough to make the trip, bundled in blankets despite the warm concert hall. Her medication adjusted to allow this one evening of normalcy. Beside her sat Mr. Chen, who had closed the restaurant for the night to attend. Rebecca and several other servers from the Golden Terrace were scattered throughout the audience. They had become more than co-workers over the years, transforming into a chosen family that celebrated Sarah's success as their own. Marcus Wellington III sat further back, in a seat he had purchased anonymously through a third party. He had attended several of Sarah's school performances over the past months, always sitting in the back, never announcing his presence. Their friendship had developed slowly, carefully, built on mutual respect and the shared understanding of how much both of them had changed. Marcus had started volunteering with arts education programs, using his connections and resources to fund music programs in underfunded schools. He was learning, slowly, to measure success in ways that had nothing to do with profit margins. The orchestra members were taking their seats on stage, the usual pre-concert chaos of tuning instruments and organizing sheet music. Sarah peeked through the curtain at the filling auditorium. The sight of so many people gathered to hear music, to participate in this shared cultural experience, made her heart swell. This was what she had dreamed of during those long hours in the conservatory practice rooms, during her father's encouragement, during the darkest moments when hope had seemed naive. Catherine Morrison appeared at Sarah's elbow, smiling warmly. She asked if Sarah was nervous. Sarah admitted she was, but it was a good nervousness, the kind that sharpened focus rather than undermining it. Catherine squeezed her shoulder and said something Sarah would remember later. She said that talent was common, but the courage to pursue it despite obstacles was rare. That Sarah had both, and that combination was what made truly remarkable artists. The house lights dimmed. The audience noise settled into expectant silence. Sarah walked onto the stage, her steps measured and confident. The applause that greeted her was warm, encouraging. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench slightly, and looked up at the conductor. He nodded, raised his baton, and the orchestra began the opening bars of the concerto. Sarah's entrance was perfectly timed, her first notes blending seamlessly with the orchestral texture. From that moment, she was lost in the music, no longer thinking about technique or interpretation, but simply allowing years of training and natural talent to merge into performance. The piano and orchestra engaged in conversation, sometimes agreeing, sometimes arguing, always creating something larger than individual parts. In the audience, people leaned forward in their seats, drawn into the narrative the music was telling. Some listeners closed their eyes, others watched Sarah's hands move across the keys with fascination. The music swelled and retreated, built tension and released it, took listeners on an emotional journey that required no words to understand. Sarah's mother wept quietly, tears of joy mixed with grief for the man who was not there to witness this moment. Mr. Chen smiled broadly, proud of the employee who had become so much more. Rebecca gripped her husband's hand, overwhelmed by the beauty and by the knowledge that she had witnessed the beginning of this journey on a difficult night in a restaurant months ago. Marcus sat very still, his expression unreadable to anyone who did not know him well, but inside he was experiencing something profound. He was watching a life he had almost destroyed instead flourish beyond what he could have imagined. The guilt he carried had transformed into something more productive, a commitment to use his privilege more thoughtfully, to see people as fully human, rather than as extras in his personal narrative. Sarah's music was teaching him things about value and meaning that years of business school had never addressed. The concerto built toward its climax, both piano and orchestra pushing toward a resolution. Sarah's entire body engaged with the performance, her face showing the intensity of emotion she was channeling into sound. The final movement was triumphant, joyful, a celebration of human creativity and persistence. When the last notes rang out and faded into silence, the audience erupted. People stood immediately applauding with genuine enthusiasm. The ovation went on for several minutes, wave after wave of appreciation washing over Sarah as she stood and bowed. The conductor gestured toward her, encouraging her to take sole acknowledgement. The orchestra members tapped their bows against music stands, their traditional form of approval. Sarah felt tears threatening but held them back, maintaining composure through years of practiced discipline. Backstage afterward, Sarah was surrounded by well-wishers. Her mother embraced her carefully, whispering words of love and pride. Mr. Chen presented her with flowers from the entire restaurant staff. Friends and colleagues offered congratulations. Music critics requested interviews, audience members wanted autographs. The attention was overwhelming but grounding, a confirmation that the risk had been worth taking, that the hard path had led somewhere meaningful. Marcus waited until the crowd thinned before approaching. When he finally stood in front of Sarah, they looked at each other for a long moment, acknowledging silently the strange journey they had shared. Marcus said simply that her father would have been proud. Sarah nodded, unable to speak around the emotion in her throat. She hugged him briefly, a gesture of forgiveness and gratitude that required no verbal explanation. Later, much later, after the crowds had dispersed and the concert hall had emptied, Sarah sat alone at the piano on the dark stage. She played quietly, just for herself, a simple melody her father had taught her when she was 5 years old. The notes drifted through the empty space, carrying with them memories of the past and hopes for the future. She thought about the night at the Golden Terrace, about the man who had tried to humiliate her and had instead changed both their lives. She thought about the choices made in desperation and the opportunities that had emerged from cruelty. She thought about talent that refused to die despite circumstances that tried to bury it. She thought about the long, difficult path from survival to thriving, and how sometimes transformation required both suffering and grace. The final notes faded. Sarah stood, turned off the stage lights, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the city waited with all its complexity and possibility. She had a morning performance at an elementary school, lunch with Marcus to discuss a new scholarship fund he was establishing, an afternoon rehearsal for next month's concert. Her life was full now, purposeful, exactly what she had once imagined before circumstances had demanded different priorities. As she pushed open the stage door and stepped into the night air, Sarah smiled. The girl who had played piano in a restaurant to avoid humiliation had become a woman who played piano because it was her calling, her gift, her way of honoring promises made and dreams deferred but never abandoned. The transformation was complete, though the journey would continue. And somewhere she imagined her father was listening, proud beyond measure, his faith in her vindicated at last. The music, after all, had always been there, patient and persistent, waiting for the moment when life would finally allow it to be heard.